Corruption is a term often reserved for high-profile politicians in influential offices, but the United Nations is hoping to lift the lid on dodgy dealings of others who behave unsportingly. The UN's doing so in a first-of-its-kind report by its Office on Drugs and Crime. This global report on corruption in sport is set to expose criminality that has accompanied the dramatic evolution of sport over the past decade. For more on this, we're joined by Ronan. He's the coordinator of the UNODC's program on safeguarding sport from corruption and crime. Ronan, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Corruption in sport is nothing new, but you've noted that in the last 2 decades, it's definitely increased and gotten more complex. What's driving that uptick, and just how bad is it, especially on the African continent?
Thanks very much, Tafuma. A pleasure to join you today. I think when it comes to problems in sport, it's definitely over the last couple of decades, the focus has been very much on doping, but we're really seeing that with professionalization, with the increase of money in sport, just so many different factors, the people trying to use sport as a way to generate illicit finances. We are seeing that there's a greater awareness and understanding that it's a fundamental problem. At a UN level, this is governments have asked us to do research, to conduct an analysis, a sort of global mapping of the problem, which has led us to develop this report that we're launching today. But I think it's also interesting to see how governments are reacting. And even over the last 2 years, there have been 2 UN resolutions on corruption in sport, but also in October this year, the G20 adopted high-level principles on tackling corruption in sport. So at a governmental level, they're seeing it as a problem that needs to be addressed. And even at the sports level, it's also increasingly something that is a focus, for example, of the International Olympic Committee, of FIFA, Confederation of African Football, World Rugby. All these international and regional bodies are seeing it as a problem that needs more attention. But focused on Africa, indeed, it's a global problem, but at a regional level in Africa, to be honest, it's difficult to get quantified in terms of numbers. But we're seeing lots of threats in the realm of illegal betting. So unregulated betting that's linked to sports, and with that illegal betting, we don't really know the scale of it, but we know it's happening. We see lots of online platforms open to populations in Africa where they can bet, and this ties into organized crime, running those sites, and how in fact they can also be used to manipulate matches, sports competitions, so that people can bet on matches that they know that they will win on, because players, athletes, officials in sports organizations are being bribed so that they lose these matches. So, I mean, there's many different layers to this, but I think the organized crime angle and that of the involvement of match fixing is a key problem.
There was something in your report that I found interesting, which was the issue of abuse in sport. Explain how the issue of abuse in sport fits the mold of corruption. True.
So just many different ways to approach this problem, but from a corruption lens, we really see it as an abuse of authority. So people in sports organizations, but not only sports organizations, but who use their authority to get away with abusing athletes, and in some cases fans, but also personnel and staff in sports organizations. And there has been, to an extent, what we've seen in the report, there has been a level of omerta, I would say, around people coming forward and reporting what is going on in sports organizations when it comes to abuse. And abuse in this sense, it's physical, sexual, psychological abuse. We've seen really horrendous cases in different parts of the world, like Haiti and Afghanistan, unfortunately, but it's not only limited to there. And corruption in that sense, it's really how the organizations are being run, the governance of them, and the abuse of authority. And abuse of authority is one of the ways we understand corruption as a manifestation of corruption in that sports setting.
Well, Ronan, very quickly, what are some of the legal policy frameworks that can be put in place to try and stem the tide of corruption in sport?
This is a great question, and it actually feeds into the point about getting more attention about this topic. What else needs to be done? And I think what came out and what we've seen on the ground is that there needs to be more cooperation between governments and sports organizations. And in that sense, the need for legislation. So, for example, the need to criminalize things like match fixing, that is one priority area. But we're also seeing even from an institutional point of view, governments, including law enforcement, anti-corruption entities, setting up focal points, if not task forces, where they act as the interface to allow them to detect, investigate, work with sports organizations who have access to the information needed to investigate and prosecute wrongdoers. So you have that legal framework, which in many countries already exists. So you criminalize corruption, but you use those laws and apply them in the sports context. And I think some countries do that with specific laws, but we're just seeing a general need, a general lack of understanding that actually existing laws can be applied on that sports context. And part of our role, part of our work at the UN is to work with governments and sports organizations to help them to see how they can do that.